Today's scripture comes from Ruth 1, verses 1 through 22. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife, his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they were on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." They lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. This is the word of the Lord.
Part 6 of Beautiful Justice, and I've entitled this message, Blaming God. Just from the title, you can see this is not an easy subject, but it's here in the Bible. It's a hugely important subject, okay? And so I hope the Holy Spirit will use the things I have to say from this subject to really help you, especially if you're the kind of person who's going through something right now where you're angry at God, okay? So part 1, bitter at God. Bitter at God. Part 2, longing for God. You can be bitter and long for God. You're bitter because you're longing for God. Okay? And part 3, Emmanuel in the garden. Today's Palm Sunday, but I decided to focus on something that happens a few days later, what happens in the Garden of Gethsemane, to close out our message, okay? Let's go to part 1, bitter at God. There's a couple places here in this passage in chapter 1. So far, the central character is this woman named Naomi. And She says a couple of really key things. But before we get to what she says, I thought I would share with you a movie about a sequence from a movie that I started. A while ago, I watched a movie on Netflix called Worth. That was the name of the movie, Worth. And it was based on a true story, and that story recounts some of the events that occur after September 11th, 2001. And some of you know that that's an important date in American history. We know it better as 9/11. And at the beginning of this movie, there's a woman, and she's being interviewed about how she feels after this horrendous event where terrorists from Al-Qaeda hijacked jetliners and crashed them into the Twin Towers in New York City and murdered more than 3,000 Americans. And here's what she says. This camera's straight on her, and she has this intensity in her eyes. And here's what she says. I'm angry. I'm angry with God. I'm angry with our country because they let this happen. My beautiful boy was burned alive because of them. We don't even have a body. If someone took your child and blew them up, we didn't even get his fingernail. How do you go on from there? That's what she said. And that's how the movie starts. When I was watching that movie, I was already thinking deeply about this passage, Ruth chapter 1. And when I heard her, I heard Naomi. This is an ancient book. It's a story about a woman, and utter catastrophe has happened to her. They endured a famine. They had to go to a foreign land. And then she lost her husband. And then she didn't lose one son. She lost both her sons. And here's this woman. She's a modern day Naomi. Naomi is a long, long time ago. Thousands of years ago. But so many people think this book, it's an old book. This Bible's an old book. You know, is it relevant anymore? Oh, it's relevant. As I was listening to this woman from 9/11, she sounded just like Naomi to me. Her heart, that anger, that just bitter loss, it was just eating her up. And if you know, we've listened to this, you've gone through this passage again and again and again, but have you noticed that? Obviously, she's a hurting person. But do you know how bad she is hurting? She is an Israelite. And she is from this area that's going to be a really, really important place in Israel. She's from Bethlehem. She's like the Jews of the Jews. She knows who her God is. She names him. She doesn't just say God, she calls him by name. She knows she has a personal relationship with him. She has every right to call him by name. And boy, is she mad. Let me show it to you. Verse 13. So here she is talking to her two daughters-in-law. And right after she basically says, you can't stick around. I don't have any more sons for you to marry. So we've gone over this multiple times now, but I really want you to hear it today. My daughters, it is exceedingly bitter. It is extremely bitter. It is as high, as horrible, as bitter gets bitter. That's what she's saying. It is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me. So the ESV says the Lord is his name. The right translation is, it's his name. She says it, names him. Yahweh did this to me. That's the way she puts it. And if that wasn't enough, if we get to the portion that we're looking at today, this is how she says it. Get to verse 19. So, after Orpah goes back, Ruth stays with her, fast forwards quickly, and then they come to Bethlehem where she's from. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women of the town, they said, "Is this Naomi?" And I've thought about this. She's been gone for 10 years. So she's 10 years older. But I don't think she's just aged in her body. When they say, "Is this Naomi?" I think they're asking something more than that. It's like, we remember you're from here. She comes back to her hometown. Probably everybody knows who she is, but there's something that's happened in her soul. There's something that's happened in her soul, and she has changed. They're like, is this the same person? That's what they're asking. Verse 20. She, that is Naomi, said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." You know what Mara means? It means bitter. That's what it means. And it's a really interesting detail. The Bible has this, especially the Old Testament, has these really efficient ways of telling you deep things without saying a lot. It takes very few words, kind of like the opposite of me, you know. I'm not that concise, but the Old Testament is very concise. Naomi, if you look at the meaning of that name, the name Naomi, it's a beautiful name. It means my sweet, my pleasant one. That's what it means. That's what you would name your daughter. It's like you see her as sweet. That name Naomi comes from the verb in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, which basically means pleasant or gentle. So that's who she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be sweet and pleasant and gentle. And I think the Bible's saying that's what she was until these last 10 years. And in these last 10 years, all that went away. So much so that her old hometown said, "Is this the same person?" And here she is saying, "Call me bitter." Verse 21, "I went away full." I want to say a little something about this. You know what I think she means by "I went away full"? It's interesting because when they went away, it was a famine. They were going into the poorhouse. They could starve. So what she doesn't mean, "I went away full." We had money, because they didn't have money. "I went away full," because I was full in my stomach, because they weren't. What she means is, "I had a man." I told you about this. The hope of her life is if she has a husband. And she had sons. Which in this culture means, "Oh, wow, you're like a wonderful, wonderful woman. You are the mother of sons." So I was full. So in her life, she was fulfilled as a woman. And then she says, "Yahweh has brought me back empty." I was full, but now he made me empty. So why call me Naomi? Do you see it there? She's casting that name off. I'm not pleasant anymore. I'm just bitter. If that's not enough, she's already accused them once. "Yahweh has brought me back empty. Yahweh has testified against me. The Almighty has brought calamity upon me." In the Old Testament, when something is said twice, that means it's repeated. I mean, it's like it's an emphasis. When it's said 3 times, it's saying, get this. It's like boom, boom, boom. She's saying it 3 times. He really hates me. Oh, he hates me. Can't you see? He hates me. That's what she's saying. That last one, Shaddai, the Almighty is El Shaddai. I know there's an old Amy Grant song, El Shaddai. It means the Almighty. She says the Almighty. If you want to be clear, well, Yahweh is his name. Yahweh is his name. And he's utterly almighty. So that means it's his fault. That's what she's saying. And there it says, has brought calamity upon me. But in the Hebrew it says, he has afflicted me. He has gouged me. And I want to just say a little something about this. When I was a young man, I didn't understand this reality. Maybe a lot of you don't understand this reality. That anger is not a simple emotion. It's a very complex emotion. Anger doesn't just have one color or one feel. There's a lot of different flavors of it. And you see a person, anger is like a visceral emotion. It comes out, you can see it on their face, you can hear it in their words. You can even pick it up through a text. If someone drops a certain bad word on you in a text, you can feel that that visceral emotion right away, and it's such a punch in the face. But mostly that's the thing we immediately recognize. Oh my goodness, this person's mad. But do you also know that they might be hurt? One of the ways that we express hurt is not just being sad, and it's not just being depressed. It could be by being mad. This is often a case inside of marriage. After a few certain marital counseling cases, I started figuring this out. It's like, okay, when this guy blows up, he's not just mad. It's actually he's more hurt than he's mad. And I think that's what's going on here. She's wounded, and it is deep. She doesn't just have an anger, she has an anger which persists. That's what bitterness is. Bitterness is anger. If you're a bitter person, or if somebody says to you, you're angry, I want to say something to you about this. Some people are bitter people. They have this, they have this anger inside their heart. And what's strange is I've pastored some of these people, is if you tell them, you're an angry person, you know what they often say? No, I'm not. And I just kind of go, yes, you are. If you're angry and somebody says to you you're angry, please believe them. Please believe them. And if you're bitter, bitterness is exactly the opposite of what we love in the Bible. The Bible calls God steadfast love. You know what joy is? Steadfast happiness. It's a happiness that won't be broken by the calamities of the Lord. That's what joy is. It's steadfast happiness. We want steadfast love and steadfast happiness. That's God. But you know what steadfast anger is? It's bitterness. That's what it looks like. It's a cancerous, toxic thing inside the soul. And we usually, if it's that bad, it's usually like a festering wound that we don't know what to do with. And that's what this sister is. So, I want to ask you a question before I go to part 2. Is there some place in your life where you're mad at God? You're bitter at God? It's pretty common, actually. I've been pastor long enough. It's quite common among Christians. And it's actually common among even non-Christians. Okay? And today, that's what we're talking about. And I hope you will wrestle with it. And maybe today's word can help you find some answer for this wound, as only God can do. Let's go to part 2. Longing for God. Do you know that even atheists get angry at God? That was strange to me. somewhere over the last dozen years, I started picking this up. I was like, that's weird. This city is filled with atheists. Sometimes they actually deny they're atheists. They're like, I'm agnostic. And I'm like, yeah, you're an atheist. Okay. There are some people who say, I don't know if there's a God, but they always live and act as if there isn't. If you live and act as if there isn't, you're an atheist. It doesn't matter if you call philosophically in your mind, if you'll take that label, you are an atheist. You're functionally an atheist. There are some Christians that say I'm a Christian, but they act always as if God isn't around or God doesn't reign in life, or that the redemptive work of Jesus is far away and all the things that are only secular in the world, that's what matters. That's how atheism looks in our culture. So, some of the atheists of our culture just love the world so much that they try to turn the world into like a heaven, and God is irrelevant. Because I'm too busy trying to make this world good for me, usually for me. Sometimes it's for other people too. But there's a different kind of atheists, godless folks, and they hate the world. And they hate how life has treated them. And their souls scream at the world and life. And it's often because something really, really bad has happened to them. Right? And here's where it gets interesting. They blame God. They blame God. They blame God so they don't believe in Him. They don't believe in Him, and then they blame Him. They want someone to be responsible for all the injustice in life, how unfair life is, how life has really kicked me bad and pushed me down. Someone should be responsible. I look around, all these horrible bad things happen, and I can't really hold anybody exactly one responsible, but it must be God, right? And here's the other thing. When the pain is really, really bad inside, it feels personal. Let me ask some of you, maybe even most of you, when you've had something really, really bad happen to you, and it really, really hurts, do you just go, well, bad things just happen to everybody, and it was just happened to me? Is that the way you normally react? Isn't there like, why did this happen to me? I'm a decently good person. Wait a second. All these really, really good things happen to him, and her, and they're really bad people. Why did this happen to me? It feels really, really personal, doesn't it? It's really personal. And it's really strange. It feels really personal even to the people who don't believe in God. Like they say there is none. So there's an author, I forget the name of the author, but I was reading, and so forgive me for the language he uses. He says, God, that bastard, he doesn't even exist. And when I read that, I was like, that's weird. What's wrong with you? It's like being mad at like Batman or something like that. Batman, he didn't show up and rescue me. When the criminals like stole stuff into my house. Deep in the human soul, we long for the world to be beautiful. Do you know, you don't just want things to be glorious, you want it to be glorious, overwhelmingly glorious, and that glory to last and last and last forever. I'm a sports fan, and right now, the glory of the Warriors is like, you guys watching these games? It's really hard to watch these games. The glory of the Warriors is dying. Maybe it's already dead. And every now and then, I'm talking to Young, and he goes, well, at least we got that championship a few years ago. And you know what? The glory of that championship is fading in my heart. It's like, mostly, I'm watching our team fail, and I'm getting upset. Because the glory is not good enough to meet that longing. And we're talking about sports. The songs. I'll just love you forever and ever, baby. Every song says this. We want a love that lasts forever and ever. We want a just kingdom that's forever and ever. We want all the cancers gone. We want all the abuse gone. We want a just king. We don't just want a good president for 4 years. We want a just king forever and ever. Isn't that everybody? If you're someone here today and you're not sure there's a God, isn't that you? Aren't you like this? And then, when life really just drops down into something horrible, don't you want to blame somebody? And you know what that hole is? It's your longing for God. That gigantic space inside you. If you've been pastored by me a long time, you'll know that your soul is an infinite space. That's a really big hole. It's an infinite space because God was supposed to be there. And when you have a hole that big, that hole has to be filled up. And what we try to do is we fill it up with the warriors, with more money, and then more money, and then more success, and then more money and success. Comfort. A political agenda. If my politics just wins, then everything will be just great. That is never going to fill up the infinite space of your heart. Because of this infinite gap inside of you, that gap is longing for God. And when you hurt, it will be flamed up. So that even the atheists will say, they start to swear at God, even though He doesn't exist, supposedly. I'll say this to you today, if you're listening to this message and you consider yourself an atheist. Maybe you call yourself an agnostic. When you feel this way, that's you made in the image of God, and deep down in your soul, you know there's a God. You don't know it up here, but you do know it down here. And because He's not present in your life, you're giving Him the middle finger because you know He exists. You know, I've said that it could feel really personal. It wasn't just some bad thing that happened out there. It's that really we all deep down know that God isn't just God, He's someone whose name we should know. And we know that He isn't just some impersonal king that's up there and it's just all these random faces, that He knows your name. He knows what's going on with you. You know, we have this idea that God, some people want to have a small vision of God. So God doesn't, He's not omniscient and doesn't know everything that ever has happened and ever will happen. So some people want to have a smaller version of God. But you know what that means is if something bad happened to you, then He doesn't know. And if He doesn't know, you can't blame Him. But you know when you blame Him, that means you know He's omniscient. And you know that means He knows your name. That means He knows your pain. And since you're in such pain and He's not helping you right now, it's personal. If my son got really, really sick and he was in great pain, and he was calling out to me and my wife from the bedroom, and we didn't show up, don't you think he would start to get bitter? It'd be really, really personal. But this is how the world is. If we're not in pain, then we're always trying to take the smaller things and make us feel better. You just have your version, I have mine. I have the Warriors and Netflix and Haagen-Dazs. Okay? And sometimes some really good laughs with my wife. But I've found, even though I have a really great wife, and Haagen-Dazs is pretty good, it's not enough for an infinite space. C.S. Lewis says that God whispers to us in our pleasures, but he shouts to us in our pains. Some of the reason why God lets us suffer is because we regularly don't pay attention. We regularly don't want him. We actually want small things instead of him. We want our Haagen-Dazs. We want our porn. We want more money. We want the perfect school or the perfect girlfriend. And if I just get that, then I'll be okay. But then God reminds you, no, you have an infinite soul. And sometimes when it hurts, you remember that I'm not there. Or at least not enough of me is there. I want to say something about this. I want to make an observation about this book. Don't you think it's incredible that this is in this book? Don't you think it's incredible that there's a book, a holy book, about God? It's supposed to be a religious book. And in this religious book, this is supposed to be an infallible book, as the Christians say. Infallible. Inspired by God. So God made sure these words were etched in his holy book for everybody to read and everybody to think about. And he let a woman scream at him and blame him 3 times and give him her biggest middle finger that she possibly could. She blamed him. That's in the Bible. You know, when I read that in the Bible, I know it's not a religious book. I know that's a real book. This book must be from God. And the God who would dare to put this in his holy book is the God who loves her. Is the God who says, I know you. I see you. I hear you. I want to show you I hear you. I'll put it in my book so you can hear me hear you. Today, if you're like a Naomi, I want to say, he hears you. And he loves you. You can't have a book about justice because that's how we feel that God is. Part of this book is this. The world is unjust and what's happened to me is unjust. So God is unjust. That's part of what this book is saying. And there are people today who will not believe in God because the world is too bad. So if the world is so bad, how could there be a real God? Because he must be a giant bleep and bleep and bleep, you know. Thus, I cannot believe in him. I will not believe in him. But this book is saying, I love you. And there's a better justice. And I am a just God. And I see you. That's what this book is saying. Now I want to give you a quote. It's a famous quote before I close my message. It goes like this. This is from the chapter on hope from Mere Christianity. Go to the next slide. There we go. Let's go like this. This is the great C.S. Lewis. And he said, the Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, women do too, actually. Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasure satisfies this desire, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably, earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy this desire, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. You know why this world, we feel like we rebel against it? We're always trying to fix it. We're always trying to make it better. Some of us, we give up trying to make it better just we're cynical. It's like, as long as my corner of the cage is comfortable, over those people over there, too bad for them. That's cynicism. But I will say it's not just earthly pleasures that suggest that we weren't meant for this unjust world. It's also our pains. Our pains point us to the one who longs to reach us, who longs to make this a world where he is always present and he is ever so close, and you know he is beautiful and loving and just. The rest of the quote I like goes like this: I must keep in myself, alive in myself, the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let this desire for the real country get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life, to press on to that other country and to help others do the same. Before I close up, I want to say this to you, Revive. This is a land that could easily turn you into Mara. She and her husband went to Moab, a godless place, to get food and money and riches. Many of you are not from here. This is home for me, Silicon Valley. But many of you came here. You came to Moab. This is Moab, a wicked, horrible place. And it can easily turn you bitter and cynical and selfish. But I want to urge you to hear what he says. All right? I must keep in myself, alive in myself, the desire for where I really, really belong. It's not even just a country or a place. Where you really, really belong as a person. And you must make that the main thing. That's what he says, right? I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to get to that person. And boy, he's waiting for you. He's longing for you. Let's close. Emmanuel in the garden. So today is Palm Sunday, but I thought I would reflect on this thing called the garden. This passage ends where Ruth follows her mother-in-law Naomi back to her hometown, and it's harvest season. Do you guys understand what harvest means? That means there's a lot of gardens. The whole giant field is a garden. It's where we will get our food. It's where we will get life. And I want to point you to a different garden. So, in Ruth, we have a woman. She's a Christian, as we would call her. She's an Israelite. She's from Bethlehem. She's a woman of God, and yet she's so bitter, she gets rid of her name and says, "Call me bitter." But she's also with somebody else. There's this other woman. She's not of the people of God. She's a Moabite. She's from Silicon Valley. She's supposed to be an atheist. She's supposed to celebrate the human sacrifice for money, just like the Moabites do. We sacrifice people in this city all the time for money. But instead, she too has suffered terribly. She's lost her husband, and now she is going to go suffer even more. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with Yahweh. And she is headed toward a garden. She doesn't know it, but she's going to show up in Bethlehem right into this giant garden of harvest. And even though she has suffered, you've got Mara. What Mara needs is somebody whose hope, whose love will go right into the suffering, even though she'll suffer. And as we follow the rest of this book, you will see that the love of Ruth will heal her mother-in-law. This unbelievably broken, afflicted woman will be healed by Ruth. But I want to close because in the Bible, you see this story. You have this person who is with the bitter woman, the Mara. And she goes into the garden. Well, there's one a lot like her. There's one who will go into a garden to enter into our suffering and our pain, to take our suffering and our pain upon us, so that his suffering and his conquering of the suffering and his justice and his mercy will overflow and answer every piece of affliction and bitterness we've ever known. You know, if you wonder, if you're a person, I'm going to give you this little piece of wisdom before I close out with God's Word. If you're a bitter person, if you're a 21st century Mara, you need some Ruths in your life whose love and hope can swallow up your bitter wounds. And then you should go to church. Here's one of the best reasons to go to church. Because at church, you'll meet the one better than Ruth. And his spirit can lift up your spirit. And you will find out that on his cross, he has swallowed up all your bitterness. So let's close with today's passage. This is Matthew chapter 26. Then Jesus went with them, that is his disciples, to a place called Gethsemane. That's a garden. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, just the three guys, he said, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. That's the Bible's very concise words for saying he was ripped apart. He was hurting so bad, he went into the place that would turn all of us into Mara. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, exceedingly, exceedingly sorrowful, even to death." This is the Matthew version. In the Luke version, it says that Jesus prayed with such anguish, his sweat was as blood. It's actually a real thing. They say that if your stress inside is so intense, blood will just come out of your sweat. Jesus went to the place where he knows the deepest sorrow and anguish. "Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, "My Father." I wanted you to see that. He didn't call him God. He called him my Father. He was in the place of ultimate anguish that would turn any of us into Mara. He was about to go to a suffering which is greater than any kind of suffering that you and I will ever face. It's all your pains and all my pains and all our wrath that we deserve. And he put it all together, and it was going to go on him. And yet he said, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but let your will be done. You know why this will was done? Because the Father knows all his sons and daughters who are filled with Mara. And he took his most beautiful, glorious Son, and he became Emmanuel. The one who is with us, who will never leave us. You need to go be with the people who have a hope that you don't have. Because you can't solve this problem. But their hope, their love, will help this dissipate away. And so the Father, he says, I know you are far from me, but I will be close to you through my Son. Every world religion is looking for an answer to this problem. The problem of ultimate horrible pain, where we scream at the world and hate life. There's only 3 religions that will say that there is this one God and he's almighty over all things. That's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And all of them come from the same source, right here, the Bible. But only one of them has the fullness of the Bible and says that God will quench that hurt. And that God's name is Jesus. Greater than Ruth. The Ruth who is Emmanuel. We're going to close out our time today, and I wish we could have more of a time of prayer, but we do have to get to our congregational meeting. And I want to urge you, if this message spoke to you, please feel free to talk to any of our elders or to me or Young. We want to help you process this today or tomorrow. Let us be as Ruth to you, if you are Mara. And most importantly, let Jesus be greater than Ruth. And his cross be the one that swallows up all your pains and bitterness. Let's pray. To all the really, really hurting Naomis, we've gone through this chapter multiple times, and I trembled to finally preach today's message. I know this book was written for a world of so-called atheists. The atheists who say they don't believe in you, and yet they scream at you. To your children who are Christians, but they're not going to church. Maybe it's because church has harmed them. Maybe it's because they feel so disappointed by life and so disappointed from you. But Father, I know this word is from you to all the Naomis of all time. And to anybody who is bitter hearing today's word, would you pour out your Spirit on them? Would you let your Spirit wash over the heart of the Emmanuel, the one greater than Ruth, Jesus, the heart of the one who conquers all our death and all our dying and all our bitterness, so we can have everlasting joy, steadfast love, This is our real birthright. We walk through this world, and our joy and our love is regularly defeated, and we can't come back from it. But thank you, Lord, that you sent one greater than Ruth to walk with us in the Moab of today so that we can have his victory and his hope and his victory. In Jesus' name.